Warren, how would you define true success?
Well, I've said many times that if you get to be 65 or 70 and later, and the people that you want to have love you actually do love you, you're a success. I've never seen anybody that reaches that age. I mean, I'm not talking about somebody that's in extreme poverty or pain or something, but I've never seen anybody that, if they have a lot of people that love them, that is other than happy. And I've seen some very, very wealthy people that they give testimonial dinners to and name schools after and everything. Nobody loves them, you know. Their own kids would say, he's in the attic, you know. Okay.
I will take a person graduating from college, and assuming they're in normal shape and everything, I will be glad to pay them, you know, probably $50,000 for 10% of all their earnings for the rest of their lives. Well, if I'm willing to pay them 10% for $50,000 for 10%, that means they're worth $500,000 if they haven't got a dime in their pocket, as long as they've got a good mind and a good body.
Today, I'd like to tell you about one other small business person. This person, I went to buy his business from him, and he turned me down, which was very wise. But this was a fellow who was born about 8 years before I was. He was born in 1922. He was we'll call him Jack, lived in the Midwest. He was a pretty good athlete, didn't like school much. And I'm going to tell you one thing early in the story. Maybe you can figure out who the guy was. The company he built hires more college graduates each year than any other company in the United States. And this fellow, who was destined for this but did not know it, Jack, went to college for a year and then dropped out. He really wasn't that interested in school. And the year he dropped out was 1941. And when the United States became under attack, he went down to the Army Air Force recruiting station, volunteered, and they turned him down because he had hay fever. So he went over to the Navy and again volunteered, and they took him. They put him on an aircraft carrier. He flew small fighter planes during World War II, got 2 distinguished flying crosses from the Navy, and then he came back to the Midwest. So now we've got a young guy. Probably by this time he would be 23 or 24 years old. And the interesting thing is, he got back to the Midwest, and he actually kind of went from one job to another for a short period of, or not such a short period of time. And he finally became a used car salesman at a Cadillac dealership in St. Louis, Missouri. And at age 35, having moved up in the organization, the sales organization, he said to his boss, could I go in the car leasing business with you? The boss said, well, if you'll cut your salary in half and you'll come up with, it was $25,000 which he borrowed, we can become partners in a car leasing company. So my friend Jack started at age 35 in the car leasing business. And he had 7 cars. It was pretty slow. In fact, one of the things he did was whenever the phone rang, he let it ring 3 or 4 times so people would think that he was very busy answering other phones. And of course, it was the only call he was going to get all day. So his first venture was okay, but it wasn't really going to go anyplace. And there's a lesson in this for all of us. At age 40, he decided, with 17 vehicles, 17 cars, he was going to go into competition in the rent-a-car business. So now he's taking on Hertz and Avis and National and people like that who have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cars, and he's got 17 cars, and his cars aren't any different than theirs. I mean, he's buying them from General Motors or Ford or Chrysler. And he can't get the airport locations. Those companies have them all sold up. But he was determined that he would basically offer the customer, can't offer him a different car, but he can offer them friendlier service than they've ever seen. And so he started a company. He named it after the battleship that he'd flown from in the Pacific, which was the USS Enterprise. And he died about a year and a half ago. But when he died, his rent-a-car company, starting with those 17 cars, was worth more than Hertz and Avis and all the rest of the rental cars put together.
Is business school worth it?
Depends on the person. Much more than it depends on the school. Some people are going to get a lot out of advanced education, and some people are going to get very little. And I don't even think it's important that every person go to college at all. We have all kinds of jobs at 70 or so thousand a year, 80,000 a year, that college training is not of use. And I actually was not keen on going to college myself. Yeah, my dad kind of jollied me into it. He could get me to do anything, but I knew I could have a good time. I liked investing, and I could read the books. You know, it's a big commitment to take 4 years, and the cost involved, and maybe the loans involved, and everything. I think depending on what your interests are in life, I don't think it's for everybody. I think it's for a lot of people, but there ought to be a reason you're going, and I didn't really see much reason. If I gave you a car, and it'd be the only car you get the rest of your life, you take care of it like you can't believe it. Any scratch, you'd fix that moment. You read the owner's manual, you keep a garage and do all these things, and you get exactly one mind and one body in this world. And you can't start taking care of it when you're 50. By that time, you'll have rusted out if you haven't done anything. So you should really make sure that you just remember that you just got one mind and body to get through life with, and to do the most with it.
There's nothing like following your passion. I mean, I love what I do, obviously, and I've loved it the whole time I've done it. Charlie is the same way. We have managers, you know, they come, some of them went to business school, some of them didn't, you know, they're all types. But the common factor in them is they love what they do, you know, and you've got to find that in life, and some people are very lucky in finding it very early. I was dumb luck that my father happened to be in the securities business, so when I would go to his office, there were a lot of books to read, and I got entranced with that. But, you know, if he'd been in some other occupation, I think I would have read those books eventually, but it would have been a lot later. So if you find something that turns you on, my guess is you're going to do very well in it. And the beauty of it is, in a sense, there's not that much competition. I mean, there are not a lot of people out there that are going to be running faster than you in the race that you elect to get into. And if you haven't found it yet, you may well have found it, but if you haven't found it yet, you've got to keep looking.
Well, life advice is, you know, the most important thing, aside from the things I've talked about already, is really who you associate with. You want to associate with people that are better than you are. I mean, basically, you'll go in the direction of the people that you associate with, and you want to have the right heroes. You want people, if you want to emulate somebody, you better pick very carefully who you want to emulate. And when, obviously, you can't pick your parents. They're going to have an enormous influence on you, but you don't get a choice on that. But you get choices as you go down the line, and who you admire, who you want to copy, and the most important for most people in terms of that decision is their spouse. It's also important in terms of a partner in business, but the partner in life is the most important one. You want to pick a spouse that's better than you are, and then he or she, and you hope they don't figure it out too fast.
The key is to certainly, in terms of your personal life, the most important decision you'll make is the spouse that most of you will likely have. And it's very important to surround yourself with people that are better than you are. You are going to move in the direction of the people you associate with. So I've been enormously lucky in that respect. I mean, I've just had teachers and friends and a spouse that really was a better person than I was, and I had enough sense to learn from these people that life went better if you behave better yourself. It took a while. So I advise you to seek out, as your partner in business, your partner in life, whatever it may be, look for the people that actually are examples to you, rather than somebody that you think you need to straighten out yourself.
So let's just say a person has been exposed to a trauma, right? And when we have an event in our life that changes our emotional state, the stronger the emotion we feel from the shock, the betrayal, the trauma, the news, whatever it is, the more altered we are inside of us, the more the brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot, and that's called the long-term memory. And long-term memories, so we remember them because we can remember the feeling associated with them. So what most people don't know is that trauma or those series of events alters our internal state, and every time we think about or remember the trauma, we produce the same chemistry in the brain and body as if the event was occurring. Now, the body is so objective that it doesn't know the difference between the real-life experience that's creating that emotion or the emotion that person is fabricating by thought alone. And it only takes a thought and a feeling, an image and emotion, a stimulus and response, and you're actually conditioning the body subconsciously into that emotional state. And that sets the baseline of that person's emotional state. So then the person goes, God, I feel empty, I feel anxious, I feel unworthy, I feel resentment, I feel frustrated, and I don't know how to change it. So then they look for things in their outer world to make that feeling go away. So whether it's a drug, whether it's gaming, whether it's pornography, whether it's complaining, doesn't matter what it is. But let's just use a pill as an example, or a drug, a recreational drug. The person takes a recreational drug. The moment they take the recreational drug, they notice a change in their emotional state. And the moment they notice that change in their emotional state, they associate that change with what caused it, and they remember what caused it. So that starts to create a dependency. So now when it comes time to change, you say to the person, why are you this way? Well, every time they recall the event, they're producing the same chemistry in their brain and body as if the event is occurring. Firing and wiring the same circuits and sending the same emotional signature to the body. Well, what's the relevance behind that? Well, your body is the unconscious mind. It doesn't know the difference between the experience that's creating the emotion and the emotion that you're creating by thought alone. So the body's believing it's living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so then when those emotions influence certain thoughts, and they do, and then those thoughts create the same emotions, and those same emotions influence the same thoughts, now the entire person's state of being is in the past. So then the hardest part about change is not making the same choices you did the day before, period. And the moment you decide to make a different choice, get ready, because it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. So we see people that come to our work that have had problems with addictions, all kinds of addictions. But really it's some emotional addiction, and that really they're trying to change, right? And so they just been programmed to think that it has to happen outside of us. So what we discovered in our research is that you could actually turn that hypnosis, that conditioning around, and not wait for the experience to produce the emotion, but teach people how to self-regulate their emotional states and be able to trade resentment, frustration, anxiety for an elevated emotion. And if you keep practicing it, you get really good at what you practice. So good at it that you actually become it. So then when people start to self-regulate, we actually measure what happens to their physiology when they do it properly. And it becomes a habit. And so then when the person notices then that their body's out of balance, they have one of two choices. They can rely on some exogenous substance or something outside of them, or they can take a moment and recalibrate their emotional state. And the only challenge, I think, with addictions is that the moment you say, I'm not gonna drink coffee, I'm not going to smoke cigarettes. I'm not going to drink alcohol. I'm not going to have sugar. The moment you make that conscious declaration with your conscious mind, the body has been conditioned and dependent on that substance.
So your personality, literally, Ed, is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. And how you think, how you act, and how you feel is your personality, and your personality is intimately connected to your personal reality, your life. So then if you want to change your life, your personal reality, you got to change your personality. And here we go again. You got to start becoming conscious of your unconscious thoughts. You got to start noticing how you act, how you speak. You got to pay attention to how you're feeling. Some people would live in guilt their whole entire life and don't even know it's guilt because at least it feels like them. So then when you start doing that, you begin to objectify your subjective self. So then when you begin to make small changes, back to thought, a new thought should lead to a new choice. A new choice should lead to a new behavior. A new behavior should create a new experience, and a new experience should create a new emotion.
Yes.
And that new emotion is teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. Now your body is embodying the truth, right? So then the new emotion should inspire new thoughts, and that's called evolution. So how do we get stuck? It's really simple. The stronger the emotion you feel from some event in your life, be it a betrayal or a trauma or whatever, the more altered you feel inside of you, the more you pay attention to the cause outside of you. So the brain takes a snapshot. It freezes an image and embosses that pattern neurologically in the brain. That's called a memory. So we create long-term memories from strong emotional events.
I think that the bigger thing is that we keep firing and wiring those circuits. They become more hardwired. So you have a thought and then the program runs. But it's the emotion that follows the thought. If you have a fearful thought, you're going to feel anxiety. The moment you feel anxiety, your brain's checking in with your body and saying, yeah, you're pretty anxious. So then you start thinking more corresponding thoughts equal to how you feel. Well, the redundancy of that cycle conditions the body to become the mind. So now, when it comes time to change, the person steps into that river of change and they make a different choice, and all of a sudden, they don't feel the same way. So the body says, well, you've been doing this for 35 years. You're going to just stop suffering and stop feeling guilty and stop feeling shameful, and you're not going to complain or blame or make excuses or feel sorry for yourself. Well, the body's in the unknown. So the body says, I want to return back to familiar territory. So the body starts influencing the mind, and it says, start tomorrow. You're too much like your mother. You'll never change. This isn't going to work for you. This doesn't feel right. And so if you respond to that thought as if it's true, that same thought will lead to the same choice, which will lead to the same behavior, which will create the same experience, which will produce the same emotion.
When that person takes their attention off their ex, takes their attention off their past, and starts looking at themselves, denaturing that identity that's built on the past. See, that person had a reaction to that circumstance, and that reaction produces a refractory period of chemicals and emotions, right? And if you don't know how to control that refractory period, and it lasts for hours or days, it's called a mood. You keep that same refractory period going on for weeks or months, now it's a temperament, one long emotional reaction. You keep that refractory period going on for years on end, that's a personality trait, and most people's personalities are defined by, I am this way because my husband cheated on me. What you're really saying is, you haven't changed in 10 years, and you're giving your vital life force to that person. Who is worth 10 years of your life?
Yeah.
Who's worth it? So then, the stronger the emotion we feel, the more we pay attention to the cause. Where you place your attention is where you place your energy. That person's giving their vital life force to heal, their life force to change to that person or that circumstance. Lower the volume to that emotion.
Yeah.
You take your attention off that person or problem. It's not the person or the problem. They're using unconsciously that person or that circumstance to reaffirm their addiction to that emotion. That's why they keep thinking about it. If they weren't addicted to that emotion, they would stop thinking about it.
Your body is your unconscious mind. In a sense, if you're sitting down and you start thinking about some future worst case scenario that you're conjuring up in your mind, and you begin to feel the emotion of that event, your body doesn't know the difference between the event that's taking place in your world, outer world, and what you're creating by emotion or thought alone. So most people then, they're constantly reaffirming their emotional states. So when it comes time to give up that emotion, they can say, I really want to do it, but really the body is stronger than the mind because it's been conditioned that way. So the servant now has become the master. And the person all of a sudden, once they step into that unknown, they'd rather feel guilt and suffering because at least they can predict it. Being in the unknown is a scary place for most people because the unknown is uncertain. And people say to me, well, I can't predict my future. I'm in the unknown, and I always say the best way to predict your future is to create it. Not from the known, but from the unknown. What thoughts do you want to fire and wire in your brain? What behaviors do you want to demonstrate in one day? The act of rehearsing them mentally, closing your eyes, and rehearsing the action.
The living organism, the human being, the age of selfish individuality has to end right now. The living organism has to take care of one another. They have to heal one another. They have to teach one another. They have to exchange important information amongst one another. They have to shine for one another, not to be outstanding and competitive, but to show others that they can shine. That's the only way we're going to make our way out of this.
We are all, in various ways, self-seeking, lacking in wisdom, lacking in courage, afraid of death, afraid of pain, unwilling really to cooperate with others, unwilling to be open to others. And we all think that's too bad. It's me that's wrong. And if only I could be the right person. Is this man going to tell me something that will help me to change myself so that I will be a more creative and cooperative member of the human race? I would like to improve. So in so many people's minds and from so many different angles, there is this urgent feeling that I must improve me. And this is critically important because it's obvious that, at least it's superficially obvious, that the way things are, we are going to hell fast. Now, in this question, can I improve me? There is the obvious difficulty that if I am in need of improvement, the person who's going to do the improving is the one who needs to be improved. And there immediately we have a vicious circle. See, we're always doing that. We're always finding a way to be one up, and by the most incredibly subtle means. So you see that, you see? And you say, I realize I'm always doing that. Now tell me, how do I not do that? I say, why do you want to know? Well, I'd be better that way. Yeah, but why do you want to be better? You see, the reason you want to be better is the reason why you aren't. Shall I put it like that? We aren't better because we want to be. Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Because all the do-gooders in the world, whether they're doing good for others or doing it for themselves, are troublemakers. On the basis of kindly let me help you or you'll drown, said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree. See, because sometimes doing good to others and even doing good to oneself is amazingly destructive. Because it's full of conceit. How do you know what's good for other people? How do you know what's good for you? If you say you want to improve, then you ought to know what's good for you. But obviously you don't. Because if you did, you would be improved. So we don't know. So what instead, therefore, if we see that you can't outwit yourself, you can't be, shall I say, unself-conscious on purpose, you can't be designedly spontaneous, and you cannot be genuinely loving by intending to love. Either you love someone or you don't. If you pretend to love a person, you deceive them and build up reasons for resentment. You say, well, I ought to be honest. That's the beginning of, so many lies you can't imagine. It's like when I hear a lot said about love. Big love thing on me. Everybody's got to love everything. But he sings songs about love. Do you know what I do? I buy a gun and bar my door. Because I know there's a storm of hypocrisy brewing. So, let's look at this thing from another point of view, which you will at first think highly depressing. Let's suppose we can't do anything to change ourselves. Suppose we're stuck with it. Now that is the worst thing an American audience can hear. There's no way of improving yourself. Because every kind of culture in this country is dedicated to self-improvement. So you see, you went out to do a self-improvement thing. Making money, you see, is a measure of improvement, a measure of your economic worthwhileness. Or at least that's what it's supposed to be. It isn't anything of the kind. But you went out, in other words, for the status instead of for the actuality. So if, in other words, you do an art, you're a musician, why do you play music? The only reason for playing music is to enjoy it. If you play music to impress an audience, to read about yourself in the newspaper, you're not interested in music. So in the same way, why do I come and talk to you? Because I enjoy it. I like the sound of my own voice. I'm interested in what I'm talking about, and I get paid for it. And that's smart in this life, is to get paid for what you enjoy. So here's the situation, you see. There is no, the whole idea of self-improvement is a will-o'-the-wisp and a hoax. That's not what it's about. Let's begin where we are. What happens if you know beyond any shadow of doubt that there is nothing you can do to be better? Well, it's kind of a relief, isn't it? Now, you say, well, now what will I do? See, there's a little fidget comes up. Because we're so used to making things better. Leave the world a better place than when you found it, sort of thing. I want to be of service to other people, and all these dreadfully hazy ideas. And so there's that little itch still. But supposing instead of that, seeing that there isn't really anything we can do to improve ourselves or to improve the world, if we realize that that is so, it gives us a breather in the course of which we may simply watch what is going on. Watch what happens. Nobody ever does this. Therefore, it sounds terribly simple. It sounds so simple that it almost looks as if it isn't worth doing. But you ever just watched? Watch what's happening and watch what you are doing by way of reaction to it. Just watch it happen. And don't be in a hurry to think you know what it is. In other words, people look at say, oh, that's the external world. Oh, how do you know? The whole thing, from a neurological point of view, is happening in your head. That you think there is something outside the skull is a notion in your nervous system. There may or may not be, but it's a notion in your nervous system. You think this is the material world. Well, that's somebody's philosophical idea. Or maybe you think it's spiritual. That too is somebody's philosophical idea. This real world is not spiritual. It is not material. The real world is simply... So, could we look at things in that way? Without, as it were, fixing labels and names and gradations and judgments on everything. But watch what happens. Watch what we do. Now you see, if you do that, you do at least give yourself a chance. And it may be that when you are in this way freed from busybodiness and being out to improve everything, that your own nature will begin to take care of itself. Because you're not getting in the way of yourself all the time. You will begin to find out that the great things that you do are really happenings. For example, no great genius can explain how he does it. Yes, he said, I have learned a technique to express myself. Because I had something in me that had to come out, I had to know how to give it out. So if I were a musician, I had to learn how music is produced. That means learning to use an instrument or learning a technique of musical notation or whatever it may be. If I want to describe something, I have to learn a language so that others can understand me. I need a technique. But then beyond that, I'm afraid I can't tell you how it was that I used that technique to express this mysterious thing I wanted to show you. If we could tell people that, we would have schools where we would infallibly train musical geniuses, scientific miracle minds. And there would be so many of them, we wouldn't know what to do with them. Geniuses would be a dime a dozen. And then we would say, well, these people are after all not very ingenious. You know, PhDs, how many of them are there? Because what is fascinating always about genius is the fellow does something we can't understand. He surprises us.
Rules of success. Now let me get right away to the first rule of success. The first rule of success is to have a vision. You see, if you don't have a vision of where you go, and if you don't have a goal where you go, you drift around and you never end up anywhere. It's like you can have the best ship in the world, you can have the best airplane in the world. If the pilot or the captain doesn't know where to go, it will just drift around. It will not end up anywhere, or most likely in the wrong place. I couldn't see myself becoming a farmer or a worker in a factory or anything like that, even though my parents wanted me to stay there and have a normal life. My father wanted me to become a police officer like he was. My mother wanted me just to stay there and marry a girl with the name of Heidi, hopefully, and have a bunch of kids and run around like the Van Trapp family in The Sound of Music. But that was their vision, not mine. My vision was totally different. I felt that I was born for something special, for something unique, for something big. I want to become a bodybuilding champion just like Reg Park. I want to get into movies just like Reg Park. And I want to make millions of dollars and be rich and famous just like Reg Park. So let me tell you something, visualizing your goal and going after it makes it fun. You've got to have a purpose no matter what you do in life. You've got to have a purpose. So that's rule number one, have a vision. Rule number two is, don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to the naysayers. Everything I ever did, the thing that I heard out of people's mouth was, that's impossible. That can't be done. Or no. I remember when I wanted to be a bodybuilding champion, including my parents and everyone else around me, said this is impossible. Why don't you become a ski champion? That's what they do in Austria. Or bicycle champion, they do some track and field. You can't be a bodybuilding champion. That is exactly what I heard, and of course I proved to the people that it can't be done. So whenever someone said to me, it can't be done, I heard it can be done. When they said no, I heard yes. When they said it's impossible, I heard it is possible. Because I am a strong believer. I'm a strong believer what Nelson Mandela said, that everything is always impossible until someone does it. Well, I'm going to be the one, I said to myself, I'm going to do it and I'm going to show it to them. Maybe it has never been done before. That's perfectly fine with me. But I'm going to do it. And I did not listen to the naysayers. So this is why I say don't listen to the naysayers. And the next thing, the third point that I'm going to make to you is, before we sit down with Jürgen and talk about the rest of the three, is work your ass off. There is no magic bill. There is no magic out there. You cannot get around. You have to work and work and work. I can tell you, I've watched the day for half an hour, Jürgen and his wife that put on this show, this great event here. They work their ass off to put this together. All year long they work and they work and they work. This does not come together by itself. When people say we don't have the time, we have 24 hours a day. We sleep 6 hours a day, so that gives you still 18 hours. And there's someone shaking their head out here in front to say probably, I don't sleep 6 hours, I sleep 8 hours, right? Or just sleep faster. So we have 18 hours a day. The average person works around 8 to 10 hours. So let's assume it's 10 hours, so we have 8 hours left. Then you travel around an hour a day, maybe 2 hours a day. So now you have still 6 hours left. So what do you do with these 6 hours? So you got to work hard. I mean, let me tell you something, when I went to America, I went to college, I went and worked out 5 hours a day, and I was working on construction. Because in those days in bodybuilding there was no money. I didn't have the money for food supplements or anything. So I had to go to work. So I worked on construction. I went to college, I worked out in the gym, and at night from 8 o'clock at night to 12 midnight, I went to acting class 4 times a week. So I did all that. There was not one single minute that I wasted. And this is why I'm standing here today. You don't need to be a bodybuilding champion, you don't need to want to be an action hero or anything like that. If you want to excel in whatever you do, those rules are for you. So my first rule is find your vision and follow it. If you don't have a goal, if you don't have a vision, you just drift around. You're not going to be happy. I grew up after the Second World War. Austria, right along with Germany, lost the Second World War. There was, of course, depression. There was a terrible economic situation. I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to escape. And luckily, one day in school, I watched a documentary about America. I knew exactly that is where I wanted to end up. The question was just, how do I get there? How do I get to America? No one had the money to travel or anything. But one day, I was fortunate enough to see a bodybuilding magazine. And on the cover was this very muscular guy. Mr. Universe becomes Hercules star. His name was Reg Park. I read the article as fast as I could, learning about how he grew up in Leeds in England, poor, and how he trained 5 hours a day, every single day, and trained and trained and trained, and then he finally became Mr. Great Britain, and then became Mr. Universe. And then he won a second Mr. Universe title and a third Mr. Universe title, and then all of a sudden he landed in Rome in Cinecittà doing Hercules movies. And as I read, I became more and more certain. I had that vision very clearly laid out, to be a champion on that same stage where he won the Mr. Universe, and then to move to America, then get into movies. From that moment on, everything that I did, no matter how hard I had to work or how much I had to struggle, it didn't matter, because I knew what the purpose was, and I found my passion. Always discover your vision, and the rest will follow. Never ever think small. You have to go and shoot for the stars. I didn't just think about being in movies. No, I wanted to be a movie star. I wanted to have above the title billing. I wanted to become the highest paid entertainer. I basically wanted to be another John Wayne. What's wrong with that? Never think small, think big.
Don't listen to the naysayers, because there's always people out there that will tell you that you will not be able to do that, forget it, it's a stupid dream that you have, or a crazy vision and those. Don't listen to the naysayers.
Well, what does it take to, become as successful as you did and do everything that was possible to be done? What does it take?
Well, I think that the number one thing is you have to have a very clear vision, a very clear goal of where you want to go. Because only then you will get there. You can have the best airplane or the best ship in the world, but if the captain doesn't know where to go, he will just drift around. If the pilot does not know where to go, he will just drift around with his plane. So I think the key thing is that we know where we're going, and that you're very passionate about that, that you see it always in front of you, the goal. And the other thing that's important is that you got to shoot for the top. You got to go and really have big goals and think big, because then you're going to get big. Then you're going to go and achieve big things. That is the most important thing. We don't achieve big things by accident. So shoot for the top, shoot for the sky, shoot for the for the stars. The other thing is that you got to work your butt off. If you think that you're going to go and accomplish something really special and be the best in anything in the world, and you think you can do it without working, you make a big mistake. Because no matter what I did, if it was in bodybuilding or in acting or if it is in the political arena, it always took a lot of work. And you got to put out, and you got to, sometimes make a lot of sacrifices. Notice, if you're not willing to work hard, forget about it. So there's another rule that is very important. I think another one is just don't be afraid to fail. Because if you're afraid to fail, then you're always holding yourself back because you're afraid that if you go all out, you may fail. Well, in weightlifting, we learned that very quickly. The only way you could break a record is if you're willing to fail. That's when you put on more weight, you try it, sometimes you would not be able to lift it, which has happened to me many times, but eventually, when you train hard enough, you will lift it. So don't be afraid to fail. I mean, how far can you fall?
This is a great day for you to run away from drama and low self-esteem and run towards serenity and pursuit of your dream, pursuit of your goals, pursuit of your aspirations, pursuit of your best life. This, my friend, is a high self-esteem day, because for far too long, you've been allowing those negative voices, you've been allowing the outside forces to break you down, to beat you down, and lower your self-worth. This is the moment, this is the time for you to act like the sun and start to shine. Time for you to ascend high up in the clouds where you belong. You were born to be a queen. You were born to be a king. You were born to reign supreme. You were born to be a champion. But champions do not subscribe to low self-esteem. They believe in themselves. They subscribe to high self-esteem. They know they are worthy. They know they were put on this earth for a reason. They know they have a purpose, and they never allow others, they never allow themselves to make them not believe that. I want you to understand one thing. On your trek to having high self-esteem and massive self-belief, there will be doubters. There will be haters. There will be naysayers. And there will be you doing the exact same thing to yourself. It's up to you to shut down anything that tries to lower your standards, anything that tries to lower your self-esteem, anything that tries to lower your belief in yourself. That's where all the self-love comes from. Because when you love you, you don't fall for the okie doke from them. You don't fall for the okie doke from yourself. Because you know your number one competition is not the outside forces. It's you. The battle of you versus you. And when you subscribe to making sure those negative voices lie dormant, and you let that positive voice explode like a volcano, that's when you start shining. That's when you start winning. That's when that smile that we see on the outside has a matching smile on the inside. So know yourself, believe in yourself, value yourself, because you are worthy. You were born for a reason. You were put on this earth to illuminate light, not to reside in the dark. So it's time for you to open that door and keep driving down that tunnel, because I promise you, there is light at the end of the tunnel. High self-esteem. I believe in you. I just need you to believe in yourself. And once you do that, you will find yourself climbing over that hump and making each and every day of your life a Wednesday. Why is it so hard for you to love yourself? Why is it so hard for you to see the beauty that you have inside? Why is it so hard for you to see yourself as a treasure? So hard for you to see that you're a diamond? Why is it so hard for you to believe in you? Why is it so hard? I totally understand why it's so hard, because it was hard for me. My mom passed away when I was 4 years old. Grew up with a mentally abusive stepmom. Totally super shy, introverted kid, got bullied. And I just remember walking the halls 5th grade hoping that they noticed me. Low self-esteem. Totally felt inadequate. I was short and I felt short. But then I discovered the real me. I discovered my gift. And I stopped worrying about everything and all the outside influences. I stopped worrying about what people thought about me. And I started believing in myself. I kicked all the negative demons out of my head. See, sometimes we have to get out of our own head. And there's so many negative self-talks, so many negative conversations that we have with ourselves on a daily basis that lead us to low self-esteem or feeling inadequate. But it's time right now, it's time today for you to kick those negative demons out of your head. They cannot share your same mental space. You need to make sure that you're allowing the positive affirmations of the universe, positive affirmations of God to lead you to positive outcomes in your real life. They will lead you to believe in yourself. And that's the first thing I had to do. I had to make a vow to not allow those negative demons in my brain to win. They kept winning every day. I had to treat them like a volcano. I had to make those negative demons lie dormant. And then I had to shovel the dirt over them to make sure they never, ever resurfaced. And anytime they tried to resurface, boom, you got a place to be and it's not in the forefront of my brain. Positive affirmations. I also found myself taking blame for everything that had happened to me, even the things that I couldn't control. And I bet you feel the same way. I bet you're blaming yourself for things that you had nothing to do with. Before you can move on, you have to forgive yourself. Before you can really love yourself, you have to forgive yourself. I'm a hip hop guy, and there's a song by the rapper Scarface where he says, "I don't love me. How in the world can I love you?" It all starts with loving yourself. But you have to forgive yourself. I know they did that to you. You didn't do it to yourself. Don't you take the blame for that. Don't make yourself feel like you're not worthy to be loved. Don't make yourself feel like you're not worthy to execute a phenomenal game plan and live the life of your dreams just because of something that someone did to you in the past. Yeah, we make our own mistakes. And we have to find a way to forgive ourselves for those as well. But don't you dare take the blame for something that someone else did to you in the past and carry it like baggage. You let that baggage go. Forgive yourself. That's the pathway to loving yourself. You also have to be strong enough to say no. Remember, you teach people how to treat you, and they will walk all over you if you let them. So when you love yourself enough to say no, when they ask you to do certain things that are not in your character, you quickly will say no. I'm not doing that. Because I know if I allow myself to go there, I'm going to be the one that's hurt. I'm going to be the one that's broken. I'm going to be the one that's battered and bruised. So absolutely not. And I've said this many times before. Some of you guys are weak and you're quick to say yes. But allow me to introduce you to your new favorite word. No. Love yourself enough to say no. And finally, I know for me, there came a point in time where I was in a relationship and it ended, and I sat down and I self-assessed and I told myself, listen, I'm not where I want to be at in my mental space and in my physical space. Let me learn how to be okay with me. Let me learn how to be okay loving me. Let me learn how to be okay walking alone in my own personal space for a while. And that's the exact same thing that I need you to do. I need you to learn to be okay by yourself. Stop thinking that you always have to be with somebody else to feel loved. Love you some you. Love yourself enough to wake up every day and be simply okay if it's just you, yourself, and you. Figure out your likes, figure out your dislikes. But never ever again feel like you need somebody else to validate you. You need nobody else's stamp of approval. And I promise you, when you're okay in your own skin and you love yourself enough to realize I don't need anybody else to validate me, that's when the universe, that's when God will allow the right person to walk into your life. But today, it's all about you. Figuring out your strengths, figuring out your weaknesses, figuring out your likes, figuring out your dislikes, and finding a way to stop hating yourself and start the journey and start the process of totally 1000% loving you. Because believe it or not, you are worth it. And so if you're not strong enough to get into a mirror and say positive affirmations like I am enough, I am worthy, I'm phenomenal, I'm awesome, then I am the reflection of you in the mirror right now telling you that you are enough, you are worthy, you are awesome. You were born to be a leader. You are the one. You are the chosen one because you have a gift to share with the world and the world needs your gift. So today, please take the necessary steps to love yourself. And guess what? Once you love yourself, you find yourself winning each and every day. And you've officially climbed the hump. And now you can make each and every day of the rest of your life a Wednesday. And this is a great day to win. Let's go.
In order to find your way through all of that, you need to develop a relationship with something that's profound. And you can. You have that capacity. And what could be more profound than the truth? And what would you rather have on your side? And to do more than your best. Because your best isn't enough. Because your best isn't as good as you could be. You have to push yourself past that. And that's, as far as I can tell, where you find what you need in life. You find the meaning that sustains you in life. And you find the patterns of action that redeem the world. Nietzsche said that you could tell much about a man's character by how much truth he could tolerate, which is very interesting. You know, there's an idea in the great Western tradition that the truth is the way and the path of life, and that no one comes to the Father except through the truth. And I believe that to be the case, because I don't think that you can manifest who you are without the truth. And so I think it's literally and metaphorically true that the pathway to who you could be if you were completely who you were is through the truth. And so the truth does set you free, but the problem is that it destroys everything that isn't worthy in you as it sets you free, and that's a process of burning. And it's painful because you cling to what you shouldn't be. Partly out of pride and partly out of ignorance and partly out of laziness. And so then you encounter something true. And you all know this. You all know this perfectly well. Because when was the last time that you learned something important that wasn't a blow of some sort? You know, and it's often you look back at your life and you think, oh God, I really learned something there. I wouldn't want to do that again, but it really changed my life. I mean, sometimes it can really destroy you, you know, an encounter with the truth, and you never really recover. But now and then something comes along and straightens you out, and a lot of you has to go. A lot of you has to burn away, you know, and I suppose in some sense the idea is that everything about you that isn't worthy is to be put into the flames. And that's another reason to be not so casual about claiming what you believe, because it isn't something that you undertake without due caution. You know, I learned when I was a kid, about 25 or so, a little older than a kid, that almost everything that I said was one form of lie or another. And I wasn't any worse, I would say, than the people that I was associating with, or any better. And the lies were manifold, you know, they were attempts to win arguments for the sake of winning the argument. That might be one. Attempts to indicate my intellectual prowess when there were competitions of that sort. Maybe just the sheer pleasure of engaging in an intellectual argument and winning. My inability to distinguish between ideas that I had read and incorporated because I had read, but hadn't realized that I hadn't yet earned the right to use, all of that. And, you know, I had this experience that lasted a long time. Well, I would say it's really never gone away. And I think this was the awakening of my conscience, essentially. This voice, for lack of a better word, made itself manifest inside me, and it said every time I said something that wasn't true, and that's usually what it said. That's not true. You don't believe that. Or there was a sensation that was associated with it. I don't think this is that uncommon, you know. I asked my psychology classes for many years in a row if they had an experience, this experience, that they had a voice in their head, let's say, it's a metaphor, or a feeling that communicated to them when they were about to do something wrong. And it was universally the case that people agreed with one of those statements or another. And the other thing I would ask is, well, do you always listen to it? And of course the answer to that was definitely no. Well, you know, I learned that so much of what I was doing was false. And I think I learned this, see, there's a reason that this came to me so clearly. I was trying to understand why people did terrible things. And I was really concentrating on the terrible, terrible things that people do. And I was interested in Auschwitz, for example, and not as a political phenomenon, but as a psychological phenomenon. I was curious about how you could be an Auschwitz guard. And I wasn't really curious about how you could be one, because, well, you could be one, of course. I was more curious about how I could be one, being such a good person as I thought I was. But I also knew that many people did many terrible things during the 20th century, and the idea that I was somehow better than them, or that I should assume a priori that I was better than them, and that I wouldn't have made the same choices or worse had I been in the same situation, was a very, very, very dangerous supposition. And that we really needed to understand why it happened, and that perhaps we could go deep enough in that understanding, which is, I think, what happens when you go deep into understanding, so that you could stop it. Because if you understand a problem, maybe you can solve it. You know, and at least in part, I came to believe that the problem was, as Solzhenitsyn said, that the problem is that the line between good and evil runs down every human heart. And I was reading Jung at the same time, you know, and he believed that the human soul was a tree whose roots grew all the way to hell. And believed also that in the full investigation of the shadow, which was the dark side of the human psyche, was that it was bottomless, essentially, that it was like an experience of hell. And that also struck me as true. And that the way to stop those sorts of things from happening was to stop yourself from being the sort of person who would do it, who would even start to do it. Because the other thing you learn when you learn about atrocities of that sort, for me it was a matter of understanding that the way to stop such things from happening, the way to remember properly, is to understand that you could do it, that you could do those terrible things, because the people who did them were like you. And that the way out of that is to stop being like that. And the way you stop being like that is by ceasing to tell yourself lies that you don't believe in, and that you know you shouldn't act out. And, you know, and that's made a huge difference in my life, for better or for worse. I mean, it was a very uncanny experience, I would say, because it's very discombobulating to experience yourself as fragmented enough so that much of what you do and say is actually false. It's a lot of work to clean that up, a lot. But the consequences are, in principle, worthwhile. And so that was part of what drove me towards clinical psychology, say, and away from political science and law and from politics in general, because I started to believe that, and I think this is the great Western idea, the proper route forward for the redemption of the individual and for mankind as a whole is as a consequence of the redemption of each individual. And I truly believe that. And I believe that that occurs as a consequence of adherence to the truth and courage in the face of being. That's rule one, right? To stand up straight with your shoulders back, is to take on the onslaught and to enter the contentious ring and to do more than your best, because your best isn't enough, because your best isn't as good as you could be. You have to push yourself past that. And that's, as far as I can tell, where you find what you need in life. You find the meaning that sustains you in life, and you find the patterns of action that redeem the world, both at the same time. I mean, life is a very difficult business. You know, it's fatal, and it's full of suffering, and it's full of betrayal and malevolence. There's nothing about it that's trivial. It's all profound. And in order to find your way through all of that capacity for hellish experience, let's say, you need to develop a relationship with something that's profound. And you can. You have that capacity.
So what advice can you give to people who are looking to have a strong and meaningful and lasting relationship with someone?
Well, the first thing is to decide if that is really what you want.
Is that fair, do you think, to say, I want to be single forever? Do you think that's realistic or fair assessment of oneself?
I think that's, for most people, a pathway to insanity.
Yeah.
You know, the psychoanalysts used to think that, and we all think this way in some ways, that you're sane because you're well put together. Your psyche is well structured, right? It's internal, somehow inside your head. And there's some truth in that, but here's a more accurate viewpoint, I think. You outsource most of your sanity because it's too complicated. And so what you do is your parents raise you to be vaguely acceptable to other people. And then you're surrounded by other people your whole life. And then every time you go off the rails a little bit, even just a little bit, people signal to you. Like, you make a joke, it's not that funny, and people don't laugh. And you think, oh, well, you know, I should probably rethink my sense of humor a little bit or pay more attention. Or you tell a rambling story and you notice that everyone's like lost in the distance. And so if you're civilized enough so that people don't shun you, and you have people around you, then they're going to be always telling you how to not be too insane. Well, if you're alone, you drift. You drift, you know, and you'll drift in the direction of your biggest weakness. And so, you know, there are some people, maybe they're introverted and disagreeable. They're not cut out for a lot of social contact. But we're social animals, man, right to the core. And it's a suboptimal solution for the vast majority of people. I think that people are having a harder time finding, like, let's call them more permanent relationships, is because it's become increasingly easy to have fleeting, casual sexual relationships. I mean, Tinder is a revolution, right? It's a revolution in sexual behavior, and it's certainly not obvious that it's
Is it a social thing? Is it just technology? Is this what people want to be doing? Because you think the
it's
fleeting,
easier, in some ways,
but the technology has enabled this fleeting sexual activity.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. And that's, but we don't want to underestimate how radical a technology that is. That's especially for men.
I do feel that deep down that all these people, men and women alike, are always longing for something more meaningful.
Well, I think that that's generally the case. I mean, you know, part of the reason for a relationship is sexual contact, obviously. Well, you don't necessarily need a relationship for that. But that's not the reason to be with someone. The reason to be with someone, there's a lot of them. So one is, well, kids who have two parents do far better, period. The data on that is crystal clear. Doesn't mean that there aren't many single parents who struggle to do a wonderful job. That's not the same thing. It's an average issue. So you need, plus, it's a lot of work to have kids. You know, you kind of need to divide up the labor, especially in the first year or two, you know, because the woman is completely overwhelmed in the first year and she needs somebody around to take care of her while she's taking care of the kid, fundamentally, or at least that's the way it looks to me. So there's that. You need the stable basis for children, and it takes them a long time to mature, and they need to learn that relationships are trustworthy, right? So there's utility and stability there. But then also, you kind of want to tangle your life together with someone, you know, because you have someone to, well, it's like two ropes that are tangled together. It's stronger, especially during times of weakness. And you have two brains instead of one, and that actually turns out to be really helpful when things are complicated. And builds a solidity into your life and a reality into your life to have someone who's along with you on this very long voyage. And so I think that deepens your life in a way that isn't really possible with fragmentary relationships as a single person. And then there's more to it than that. It's like, I think of wrestling, there's this scene in the Old Testament where Jacob wrestles with an angel. He's wrestling with God, actually, which is quite an interesting, that's what Israel means, right? Wrestling with God. Yeah, that just blew me away when I learned it. It's so
Is that true?
The true people of
Hebrew?
Israel are those who wrestle with God.
Wrestle
Yeah,
with
it's
God.
not believe exactly. It's a whole different thing, man. It's a whole different thing. And
Isn't
so,
it like fear from God? What it means? That's what I thought.
well, from the work I did in the last couple of months looking at this, and I looked into it quite deeply, it does mean wrestling, essentially, and it does derive from that scene in the Old Testament where Jacob wrestles with God. That's when he gets the name Israel. And his hip is dislocated, right? Permanently. He has a permanent limp after that. It's no joke. But I think of marriage the same way. Like, people think, well, they lived happily ever after. It's like, that's not what you want in a marriage.
Yeah.
You want someone to contend with, you know, because you learn through that wrestling, you know, like you learn where you're an idiot and where you should stop being, and vice versa. Yeah. So that's the spiritual aspect of marriage. It's the fact that you have to contend with someone under all sorts of circumstances. Theoretically, is what would you say? It's a manner of promoting psychological, or you could say spiritual growth, and it's genuine. You know, that's why marriage is a sacrament in most human communities, right? It's stamped both by the state and by the sacred authorities, because it's not just a physiological union. That's what animals do. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with the physiological union, but it has to be placed in the context of everything else a human being is. And I do think it's dreadful for people not to have that. And
do you think it's become harder for people to have meaningful, lasting relationships, or has it always been this hard? I feel like I thank God that I'm not dating now, because I feel like it seems like it's miserable out there right now.
Well, it's hard
to try to meet people.
It is hard although, you know, it's easier to meet people because there's more ways of meeting them.
Right.
But the ways of meeting them are more shallow. Mm-hmm. In my clinical practice, I would say that the rise of the internet dating option has actually overall been good for people who are looking for a partner. Now, there is some speculation and some evidence that it lowers the transaction price of separation and divorce. You know, because one of the reasons you don't separate or you don't get divorced is like, well, you're going to find someone else. And if it's easier to find someone else, then perhaps you're more tempted to sever the relationship. So maybe you lose in one place where you gain in the other. But I think there are different kinds of hard that it is. You know, it's hard for couples to figure out how to manage two careers. It's hard for women to figure out how to get educated and get their career launched at the same time that they're finding a partner and having kids. Because women have this tight time frame, you know. I mean, they've got to get a lot done by the time they're mid-30s for sure. And so it's not much time, you know. It's like 15 years really from the time you're an adult. You better get at it. It's not very long.
Right.
So I think there are new challenges that have arisen that weren't there for previous generations. But previous generations had it hard in other ways.
That's very true, yeah. like dying
like they
at
died.
50.
Yeah. Or in childbirth, for example.
I feel like people also need to like understand how to make a relationship work. Like it's not just magic. You need to kind of put in the work to make it work.
It's hard.
You need
It's
to put in
challenging.
effort and compromise a lot of times on, like if you live by yourself, you can do everything the way you would want.
Yeah.
If you live with someone else, then there's compromises to make.
Yes.
But in the long picture, it's better for you.
Well, that's it. That's it. There's sacrifices to be made in the short term.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, people have to. The effort issue is like, well, when you're in love with someone, you're going to organize your schedule and make them a priority. And, you know, that's in some ways a fleeting state, although it's not necessarily as fleeting as people think it is, but whatever. It's obviously a priority. And then you get married and, you know, you kind of get accustomed to having each other around, and then everything else is more important and the relationship drifts to the bottom. And then people get dissatisfied and they start looking for excitement and adventure otherwise. Well, you can't do that. You have to prioritize the relationship. Like my observation clinically has been for a couple to maintain their relationship without it deteriorating, they have to spend 90 minutes a week together talking about their lives, about how the house is run, about what they've all been doing to keep their stories caught up, right?
That's not really even that much.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not that much.
Yeah.
But and which is a good thing. You can actually do it. And then they need to spend at least one time having a date. And 2 is better. 1 is necessary. 2 is better. You can't aim for a lot more than that because, you know, life is very busy. And if it's going to be sustainable, it has to be realistic. But they need to make time for each other twice a week and talk in a non-romantic way, just practically about the domestic economy and about everything that's going on. And that keeps people tied to each other and updated. And so that's sort of your minimal commitment level if you don't want things to deteriorate. The next best predictor of lifetime success is conscientiousness. Well, so, and of the 2 aspects of conscientiousness, say orderliness and industriousness, the better predictor is industriousness. So the question is, well, what can you do about your industriousness? And the answer to that is, well, that's kind of rough too, because there's a strong genetic component. But you can work on micro habits with regards to your conscientiousness. And I think the best micro habits, this is partly to do with this future authoring program processes, I think the best thing you can do with regards to your conscientiousness is to set up some aims for yourself, goals that you actually value. And the future authoring program helps people do that. And basically it does a situational analysis it helps you do a situational analysis of your life more than a psychological analysis, I would say. And so the questions are something like, well, all right, you're going to have to put some effort into your life and you need to be motivated to do that. And so what are the potential sources of motivation? Well, you could think about them in the big 5 manner. You know, if you're extroverted, you want friends. If you're agreeable, you want an intimate relationship. If you're disagreeable, you want to win competitions. If you're open, you want to engage in creative activity. If you're high in neuroticism, you want security. Okay, so those are all sources of potential motivation that you could draw on, that you could tailor to your own, you know, your own personality. But then there are dimensions that you want to consider your life across. And so we ask people about, well, you know, if you could have your life the way you wanted it in 3 to 5 years, if you were taking care of yourself properly, you know, what would you want from your friendships? What would you want from your intimate relationship? How would you like to structure your family? What do you want for your career? Well, how are you going to use your time outside of your job? And how are you going to regulate your mental and physical health, and maybe also your drug and alcohol use? Because that's a good place to auger down, you know, because alcoholism, for example, wipes out, you know, 5 to 10% of people. So you want to keep that under control. And then so maybe, you know, you develop a vision of what you would like your life to be, and that associates the goal. Well, once the goal is established, and then you break down the goal into micro processes that you can implement, the micro processes become rewarding in proportion in relation to their causal association with the goal, and that tangles in your your incentive reward system. You know, we talked about the dopaminergic incentive reward system, and that's the thing that keeps you moving forward. And the way it works is that it works better if it produces positive emotion when it can see you moving towards a valued goal. Okay, well, what's the implication of that? Better have a valued goal, because otherwise you can't get any positive motivation working out. And so the more valuable the goal, in principle, the more the micro processes associated with that goal start to take on a positive charge. And so what that means is, well, you get up in the morning and you're excited about the day, you're ready to go. And so as far as I can tell, what you do is you specify your long-term ideal. Maybe you also specify a place you want to stay the hell away from, so that you're terrified to fail as well as excited about succeeding, because that's also useful. You specify your goal. You do that in some sense as a unique individual. You want to specify goals that make you say, oh, if that could happen as a consequence of my efforts, it would clearly be worthwhile. Because the question always is, why do something? Because doing nothing is easy. You just sit there and you don't do anything. That's real easy. The question is, why would you ever do anything? And the answer to that has to be because you've determined by some means that it's worthwhile. And then the next question might be, well, where should you look for worthwhile things? And one would be, well, you could consult your own temperament. And the other would be, well, you kind of look at what it is that people accrue that's valuable across the lifespan. So you do a structural analysis of the subcomponents of human existence, and I already did that. You need a family, you need friends. Like, you don't need to have all these things, but you better have most of them. Family, friends, career, educational goals, plans for, time outside of work, attention to your mental and physical health, etc. That's what life is about. And if you don't have any of those things, well, then all you've got left is misery and suffering. So that's a bad deal for you. So once you set up that goal structure, let's say, and that's really in many ways that's what you should be doing at university. That's exactly what you should be doing, is trying to figure out who it is that you're trying to be, right? And you aim at that, and then you use everything you learn as a means of building that person that you want to be. And I really mean want to be. I don't mean should be, even those things are going to overlap. And it's important to distinguish between those, because that's partly, and this is back down to the micro routine analysis. So if I was saying, well, you're going to try to make yourself more industrious. Okay, number one, specify your damn goals, because how are you going to hit something if you don't know what it is? That isn't going to happen. And often people won't specify their goals too, because they don't like to specify conditions for failure. So if you keep yourself all vague and foggy, which is real easy, because that's just a matter of not doing as well, then you don't know when you fail. And people might say, well, I really don't want to know when I fail, because that's painful. So I'll keep myself blind about when I fail. That's fine, except you'll fail all the time then. You just won't know it until you've failed so badly that you're done. And that can easily happen by the time you're 40. So I would recommend that you don't let that happen. So that's willful blindness, right? You could have known, but you chose not to. Okay, so once you get your goal structure set up, you think, okay, if I could have this life, looks like that might be worth living, despite the fact that it's going to be, anxiety provoking and threatening, and there's going to be some suffering and loss involved and all of that. Obviously, the goal is to have a vision for your life such that, all things considered, that justifies your effort. Okay, so then what do? Well, then you turn down to the micro routines. It's like, okay, well, this is what I'm aiming for. How does that instantiate itself day to day, week to week, month to month? And that's where something like a schedule can be unbelievably useful. Google Calendar. It's like, make a damn schedule and stick to it. Okay, so what's the rule with the schedule? It's not a bloody prison. That's the first thing that people do wrong. They say, well, I don't like to follow a schedule. Well, it's like, well, what kind of schedule are you setting up? Well, I have to do this, then I have to do this, then I have to do this, and then I just go play video games, because who wants to do all these things that I have to do? It's like, wrong. Set the damn schedule up so that you have the day you want. That's the trick. It's like, okay, I've got tomorrow. If I was going to set it up so it was the best possible day I could have, practically speaking, what would it look like? Well, then you schedule that. And obviously there's a bit of responsibility that's going to go along with that, because if you have any sense, one of the things that you're going to insist upon is that at the end of the day, you're not in worse shape than you were than at the beginning of the day, right? Because that's a stupid day. if you have a bunch of those in a row, you just dig, you dig yourself a hole and then you bury yourself in it. It's like, sorry, that's just not a good strategy. It's a bad strategy. So maybe 20% of your day has to be responsibility and obligation, or maybe it's more than that, depending on how far behind you are. But even that, you can ask yourself, okay, well, I've got these responsibilities. I have to schedule the damn things in. What's the right ratio of responsibility to reward? And you can ask yourself that, just like you'd negotiate with someone who is working for you. It's like, okay, you got to work tomorrow. Okay, so I want you to work tomorrow. And you might say, okay, well, what are you going to do for me that makes it likely that I'll work for you? Well, you could ask yourself that, So maybe you do an hour of responsibility and then you play a video game for 15 minutes. I don't know, whatever turns your crank, man. But, you have to negotiate with yourself and not tyrannize yourself. Like you're negotiating with someone that you care for, that you would like to be productive and have a good life. And that's how you make the schedule. It's like, and then you look at the day and you think, well, if I had that day, that'd be good. Great. And you're useless and horrible, so you'll probably only hit it with about 70% accuracy, but that beats the hell out of 0, right? And if you hit it even with 50% accuracy, another rule is, well, aim for 51% the next week, or 50.5% for God's sake, or because you're going to hit that position where things start to loop back positively and spiral you upward. And so that's one way that you can work on your conscientiousness, is plan a life you'd like to have. And you do that partly by referring to social norms. That's more or less rescuing your father from the belly of the whale. But the other way you do that is by having a little conversation with yourself about, as if you don't really know who you are, because you know what you're like. You won't do what you're told. You won't do what you tell yourself to do. You must have noticed that. It's like you're a bad employee and a worse boss, and both of those work, for you. You don't know what you want to do, and then when you tell yourself what to do, you don't do it anyways. You should fire yourself and find someone else to be. But my point is that you have to understand that you're not your own servant, so to speak. You're someone that you have to negotiate with, and you're someone that you want to present the opportunity of having a good life to. And that's hard for people because they don't like themselves very much. I was thinking the other day, a journalist asked me why people are responding so positively to what I'm saying, the young men, for example, and I thought, why? Yeah, that's a good question. I said, well, I'm actually on their side. I'm really happy that they're not wasting their lives. I'm really sad to see that people are disenchanted and nihilistic and depressed and anxious and aimless and perverse and vengeful and all of those things. It's terrible. And then to see people question whether that's necessary and then to start to rise out of it, it's so fun. Like last night I was after my talk, it's overwhelming. I don't usually think about these things, but I was after my talk last night, and so all these people line up, they have their 15 seconds with me, and they're kind of tentative. They're excited and attentive when they come up to talk to me, and then they have 15 seconds of time to tell me something. I'm really listening to them, and they're hesitant about whether or not to share the good news about their life, and I think it's often because when people share good news about their life, people don't necessarily respond positively. They don't get encouragement, and people need so little encouragement. It's just unbelievable. And so they'll tell me something good, and I'm like, God, that's so good. Somebody says, oh, I'm getting along way better with my father. I haven't seen him for 10 years, and now we get along. It's like, wow, great. And then the power of that, you can't overstate the power of that for individuals to get their life together. The individual is an unbelievably powerful force, and every single person who gets their act together a little bit has the capacity to spread that around them. It's a chain reaction, and so it's a lovely thing to see.
That's fantastic.
Our daughter ended her life at 24 due to depression. If someone is determined to end their life, how can one change their mind? Well, first of all, I'm very sorry about that. That's a terrible thing. Look, I had this friend,
story. There's been a lot of depression in our family, so it's a question that cuts close to the bone. Anyways, I had this friend, a friend of my parents, and her granddaughter committed suicide, you know. She was just beating herself up about that. What could have I done? What could have I done differently? This is the problem with suicide. It leaves everybody behind thinking, oh my God, what could have I done? I could have treated the person better. I could have listened. I could have been there. It's like, and she was just beating herself up about this, really feeling that she wasn't a useful person, that she'd failed as a grandmother. She's a really good person, you know. And so I went for a walk with her, and I said, and she's married and she likes her husband, and he's a really good guy. And I said, look, you're blaming yourself for your granddaughter's suicide. It's like, are you blaming your husband? Are you sitting him down and telling him what a useless bastard he was as a grandfather because his granddaughter committed suicide and how he failed completely? She said, no, I'd never do that. So I said, well, don't do it to yourself.
One of the things that has just blown me away in the last year, because I've talked to lots of people live, you know, but also lots of people online. But it's more obvious live, and it's obvious in this theater as well, is that I've gone around and spoken, and a large proportion of my audience has been young men, you know, under 30, something like that. And I've spoken to them a lot about responsibility. And what's so odd about this is that of all the things that I've spoken about, because I can see the audience and I can feel how the audience is reacting, because I'm always paying attention to all of you insofar as I can manage that. So I get some sense of how what I'm saying is landing, you know, which you have to do if you're going to speak effectively to people. And what happens is if I talk about responsibilities, everyone is silent, just like they are now. It's silent and not moving, right? Focusing, attentive. Say, pick up your responsibility. Pick up the heaviest thing you can and carry it. And the room goes quiet and everybody's eyes open. And I think, that always makes me break up. I don't know why. I was speaking to an English journalist today. He was going to write an article in Spectator magazine, and I was talking about this. And at the same point in the discussion, I had the same emotional reaction. I don't really understand it. I think there's something about it that's so crucial, because, you know, we've been fed this unending diet of rights and freedoms, and there's something about that, there's something about that that's so pathologically wrong. And people are starving for the antidote, and the antidote is truth and responsibility, right? And it isn't because that's what you should do in some I know better or someone knows better for you what you should do sense. It's that's the secret to a meaningful life, and without the meaningful life, then all you have is suffering and nihilism and despair and all of that, and self-contempt, and that's not good. And so it's necessary for men to stand up and take responsibility, and they all know that and are starving for that message. And the message is more that that's also a good thing, to stand up and take responsibility, because you're cursed so much now from when you're young with this notion that your active engagement with the world is part of what is destroying and undermining the planet and adding to the tyranny of the social systems. It's like, how about not so much of that, hey? Because it's too soul deadening. It's anti-human right to the core. And my sense instead is that, you know, if you were able to reveal the best of yourself to you in the world, that you would be an overwhelming force for good.
My primary motive as a clinical psychologist and educator is to help individuals live more meaningful and productive lives in harmony with their families and their community. That's my motive. And the evidence for that, I think, is, well, if people go online, and first of all, you can watch the lectures and decide for yourself, but you can also go, I suspect probably maybe 250,000 people have commented on the lectures and their effects on them. And so That's what people say. I'm watching the lectures. I'm trying to develop a vision for my life. I'm trying to become more responsible, and it's really helping. And that's what I hear all the time when I do these public lectures, which aren't political.
But when we gain success, we raise the bar. We set our ambitions higher. I mean, what is your end game? What do you want?
That's all. That's what I want. I want to help as many individuals as possible become more courageous, more truthful, and more engaged in the pursuit of individual, familial, and social harmony. That's what I want.
You're pursuing what is meaningful.
I'm pursuing, I believe that to be the case. It's certainly meaningful to me. I mean, there isn't, everywhere I go now, it doesn't matter where I land, in what airport, or if I walk down the street, 3 or 4 people will come up to me and they'll tell me, I was in a dark place, I was anxious, depressed, nihilistic, drug addicted, alcoholic, homeless, in jail, you name it. Bad relationship with my girlfriend, bad relationship with my parents. I've been watching your lectures or reading your book. I've been trying to tell the truth and get my life together, and everything is way better. And so then you think, well, if you could have what you wanted and what would be meaningful, you imagine you could go anywhere in the world and people would come up to you that were strangers and tell you that. That's as good as it gets.
I read the story. It's an autobiography, if I remember correctly, of the captain. I might be wrong about that, but I've got the basic story right. Well, they had a shipwreck in the Antarctica. And then they were there for a whole year in the Antarctica, you know? And none of them died, not one. He didn't lose a single man, not one. He kept their morale high. And then they took this boat that was on the ship, and they crossed like 400 miles of the roughest ocean, the roughest frigid ocean in the world, right? You don't go in that ocean. And then they went to an island, and they walked across the island, across these mountains that no one else has ever climbed since. And they went to the city on the other side of the island, and they got a boat, and they went and rescued their compatriots, and everyone survived. It's like Endurance is the name of the book. You read that book, man, you think, wow, people are really tough, you know, and it's ridiculous. So who knows how tough you are? And maybe you find out by going out to find out how tough you are, right? So you take on a challenge, one that you think you can master, that's just a bit beyond your grasp. And you master it, and then you're a little tougher, and you think, hey, that worked out pretty well. And so then you're more of a monster. And then you go out and you find another challenge that's even bigger, and you think, well, maybe I can do that too. And then all of a sudden you can, and you get a little bit bigger, and God only knows what the limit is of you. And you find out by pushing yourself against the world, and of course that's what Abraham is doing.
Like, you don't need to have all these things, but you better have most of them. Family, friends, career, educational goals, plans for, time outside of work, attention to your mental and physical health, etc. That's what life is about. And if you don't have any of those things, well, then all you've got left is misery and suffering. So that's a bad deal for you. So once you set up that goal structure, let's say, and that's really in many ways that's what you should be doing at university. That's exactly what you should be doing, is trying to figure out who it is that you're trying to be, right? And you aim at that, and then you use everything you learn as a means of building that person that you want to be. And I really mean want to be. I don't mean should be. Even those things are going to overlap. And it's important to distinguish between those, because that's partly, and this is back down to the micro-routine analysis. So if I was saying, well, you're going to try to make yourself more industrious. Okay, number one, specify your damn goals, because how are you going to hit something if you don't know what it is? That isn't going to happen. And often people won't specify their goals too, because they don't like to specify conditions for failure. So if you keep yourself all vague and foggy, which is real easy, because that's just a matter of not doing as well, then you don't know when you fail. And people might say, well, I really don't want to know when I fail because that's painful. So I'll keep myself blind about when I fail. That's fine, except you'll fail all the time then. You just won't know it until you've failed so badly that you're done. And that can easily happen by the time you're 40. So I would recommend that you don't let that happen. So that's willful blindness, right? You could have known, but you chose not to. Okay, so once you get your goal structure set up, you think, okay, if I could have this life looks like that might be worth living, despite the fact that it's going to be, anxiety provoking and threatening, and there's going to be some suffering and loss involved in all of that. Obviously, the goal is to have a vision for your life such that, all things considered, that justifies your effort. Okay, so then what do? Well, then you turn down to the micro routines. It's like, okay, well, this is what I'm aiming for. How does that instantiate itself day to day, week to week, month to month? And that's where something like a schedule can be unbelievably useful. Google Calendar. It's like, make a damn schedule and stick to it. Okay, so what's the rule with the schedule? It's not a bloody prison. That's the first thing that people do wrong. They say, well, I don't like to follow a schedule. Well, it's like, well, what kind of schedule are you setting up? Well, I have to do this, then I have to do this, then I have to do this, and then I just go play video games, because who wants to do all these things that I have to do? It's like, wrong. Set the damn schedule up so that you have the day you want. That's the trick. It's like, okay, I've got tomorrow. If I was going to set it up so it was the best possible day I could have, practically speaking, what would it look like? Well, then you schedule that. And obviously there's a bit of responsibility that's going to go along with that, because if you have any sense, one of the things that you're going to insist upon is that at the end of the day, you're not in worse shape than you were than at the beginning of the day, right? Because that's a stupid day. If you have a bunch of those in a row, you just dig yourself a hole and then you bury yourself in it. It's like, sorry, that's just not a good strategy. It's a bad strategy. So maybe 20% of your day has to be responsibility and obligation, or maybe it's more than that, depending on how far behind you are. But even that, you can ask yourself, okay, well, I've got these responsibilities. I have to schedule the damn things in. What's the right ratio of responsibility to reward? And you can ask yourself that, just like you'd negotiate with someone who is working for you. It's like, okay, you got to work tomorrow. Okay, so I want you to work tomorrow. And you might say, okay, well, what are you going to do for me that makes it likely that I'll work for you? Well, you could ask yourself that, So maybe you do an hour of responsibility and then you play a video game for 15 minutes. I don't know, whatever turns your crank, man. But, you have to negotiate with yourself and not tyrannize yourself. Like you're negotiating with someone that you care for, that you would like to be productive and have a good life. And that's how you make the schedule. It's like, and then you look at the day and you think, well, if I had that day, that'd be good. Great. And you're useless and horrible, so you'll probably only hit it with about 70% accuracy, but that beats the hell out of 0, right? And if you hit it even with 50% accuracy, another rule is, well, aim for 51% the next week, or 50.5% for God's sake, or because you're going to hit that position where things start to loop back positively and spiral you upward. And so that's one way that you can work on your conscientiousness, is plan a life you'd like to have. And you do that partly by referring to social norms. That's more or less rescuing your father from the belly of the whale. But the other way you do that is by having a little conversation with yourself about, as if you don't really know who you are, because you know what you're like. You won't do what you're told. You won't do what you tell yourself to do. You must have noticed that. It's like you're a bad employee and a worse boss, and both of those work, for you. You don't know what you want to do, and then when you tell yourself what to do, you don't do it anyways. You should fire yourself and find someone else to be. But my point is that you have to understand that you're not your own servant, so to speak. You're someone that you have to negotiate with, and you're someone that you want to present the opportunity of having a good life to. And that's hard for people because they don't like themselves very much. So, they're always like cracking the whip and then procrastinating, and cracking the whip and then procrastinating. And it's like, God, it's so boring and such a pathetic way of spending your time. And you know what that's like, because you probably waste like 6 hours a day. And I think we did an economic calculation about that a while back, right? Your time's probably worth $50 an hour, something like that. I mean, you're not getting paid that now, but you're young. And so this is investment time. And what you do now is going to multiply its effects in the future. So let's say it's $50 an hour, which is perfectly reasonable. So if you waste 6 hours a day, and you are, then you're wasting about $2,000 a week, or about $100,000 a year. So go ahead, but that's what it's costing you every hour. And you need to know what your damn time is worth. So let's say it's not $50, it's 30, whatever. Maybe it's 100, it's somewhere in that range. One of the things you should be asking yourself is, when you spend an hour, was that, well, what if I paid someone $50 to have had that hour? And if the answer is no, it's like, well, maybe you should do something else with your time. And it depends on whether or not you think that your time's worthwhile. But the funny thing about not assuming that is if you assume your time isn't worthwhile, what happens is you don't just sit around sort of randomly in a state of responsibility-less bliss. What you do is you suffer existentially. And so that seems like a stupid solution.
You know, if you take people, and I've told you this, and you expose them voluntarily to things that they are avoiding and are afraid of, you know, that they know they need to overcome in order to meet their goals, their self-defined goals. If you can teach people to stand up in the face of the things they're afraid of, they get stronger. And you don't know what the upper limits to that are, because you might ask yourself, like, if for 10 years, if you didn't avoid doing what you knew you needed to do, by your own definitions, right, within the value structure that you've created, to the degree that you've done that, what would you be like? Well, you know, there are remarkable people who come into the world from time to time, and there are people who do find out over decades-long periods what they could be like if they were who they were, if they spoke their being forward. And they get stronger and stronger and stronger, and we don't know the limits to that. We do not know the limits to that. And so you could say, well, in part, perhaps the reason that you're suffering unbearably can be left at your feet, because you're not everything you could be, and you know it. And of course, that's a terrible thing to admit, and it's a terrible thing to consider, but there's real promise in it, right? Because it means that perhaps there's another way that you could look at the world, and another way that you could act in the world, so what it would reflect back to you would be much better than what it reflects back to you now. And then the second part of that is, well, imagine that many people did that, because we've done a lot as human beings. We've done a lot of remarkable things, and I've told you already, I think before, that today, for example, about 250,000 people will be lifted out of abject poverty, and about 300,000 people attached to the electrical power grid. We're lifting people out of poverty collectively at a faster rate that's ever occurred in the history of humankind by a huge margin. And that's been going on unbelievably quickly since the year 2000. The UN had planned to have poverty between 2000 and 2015, and it was accomplished by 2013. So there's inequality developing in many places, and you hear lots of political agitation about that. But overall, the tide is lifting everyone up, and that's a great thing. And we have no idea how fast we can multiply that if people got their act together and really aimed at it. Because, you know, my experience is with people that we're probably running at about 51% of our capacity. I mean, you can think about this yourselves. I often ask undergraduates how many hours a day you waste, or how many hours a week you waste. And the classic answer is something like 4 to 6 hours a day. You know, inefficient studying, watching things on YouTube that not only do you not want to watch, that you don't even care about, that make you feel horrible about watching after you're done. That's probably 4 hours right there. You know, you think, well, that's 25 hours a week, it's 100 hours a month, that's 2.5 full work weeks, it's half a year of work weeks per year. And if your time is worth $20 an hour, which is a radical underestimate, it's probably more like 50 if you think about it in terms of deferred wages. If you're wasting 20 hours a week, you're wasting $50,000 a year. And you are doing that right now. And it's because you're young, wasting $50,000 a year is a way bigger catastrophe than it would be for me to waste it, because I'm not going to last nearly as long. And so if your life isn't everything it could be, you could ask yourself, well, what would happen if you just stopped wasting the opportunities that are in front of you? You'd be, who knows how much more efficient? 10 times more efficient, 20 times more efficient. That's the Pareto distribution. You have no idea how efficient people get. It's off the charts.
Let's get some motivational gains today in today's discount therapy.
Gains. Get your inspirational woihoi at shirtharmony.com. Link in the description below. Check out my new book, Serve, the Rule Book, step-by-step rules for a fast execution on a new mindset. Link in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll be back next week. See ya.